cute, but I love being 36 years old.
Welcome to your 30's!
I get to jump on my couch, eat whatever I want, nobody makes me wipe anymore, and best of all, I can play as many video games as I want, anytime I want. Except that I can't. You see, all this big boy freedom comes with responsibilities that you never think about when you're a dumbass little kid at t-ball practice. All you think about back then is how you wish you had the money to buy every game ever made. I never really had the luxury to even think about collecting back then. I was just happy to get a hold of whatever I could, usually through rentals. And whenever I had something new, I'd play it like 50 times, memorizing all kinds of random little details. Again, this was in the 90s when there were only like 60 channels and the internet sucked. Back then, you'd play games until one of the few shows you liked came on, only to go back to replaying your rented copy of Buck Bumble for the third time. I mean, it was either that or lay on the ground until your eye had an allergic reaction to the carpet again. Once I was old enough to get a job, though, I could finally buy as many games as I wanted, and boy did I. Plus, with the internet not sucking horse eggs back then, I had the means to research all the best games I should pick up, and for the most part I did, except for the really expensive ones. But even then, I still managed to snag a few of them. Fast forward more than a decade later, and I still haven't even touched most of these games, not because I don't want to, but because I just can't. There's too goddamn many of them. I mean, I probably could have played most of them by now if I had just done nothing else but play video games and work to pay the bills this whole time, but like, I also enjoy other things in life too, you know? I like working so I can have money to buy things like video games, skateboarding, going to the movies, watching TV shows, manga, and ironically enough, making YouTube videos about video games that take even more of my video game time away. Contrary to popular belief, I also have friends that I like to hang out with from time to time. And as if it wasn't hard enough to find the time to play all my old games, there's still more coming out than ever before, and damn good ones too. A lot of people will claim that whatever games they grew up with are the best ones ever, but not me though. Maybe this is just me, but I honestly think that games are more fun today than ever before. Obviously, there's plenty of retro games that hold up to anything that comes out today, and sure, there's things like on-disc DLC, massive day one patches, microtransactions, and all that, but like, you don't have to just play the shitty games, you turkey. Don't get me wrong, I am still playing older games too, just a lot less than I imagined I would when I first bought them, and that's really what gaming in your 30s is all about. You have the freedom and money to afford to play anything you want, but you just don't have the time to anymore. Back in the day, you'd explore every nook and cranny to games you actually owned on your 15th or 16th playthroughs. But these days, though, it almost feels like I'm rushing to finish games just so I can move on to whatever's next in my backlog. I don't buy games unless I genuinely want to play them, but even so, it's impossible to manage the time to work all the new releases through my rotation. Like, do I want to play an amazing 120-hour RPG and nothing else, or do I want to play like 12 10-hour platformers? Most recently, at the time of this recording, 100% in Mario Wonder in like 10 hours, and it was absolutely amazing, but a 2D platformer can only do so much for me, which is why Sonic Superstars felt like such a chore to play right after. This made me dive back into Tears of the Kingdom after kinda ignoring it for a few months, and I had a great time finally finishing it, but whenever I was playing it, I kinda felt like I was wasting my time, which is such a weird feeling, to have fun but feel bad about it. I didn't feel bad because I felt like I could be doing something better with my time, because after all, this was my dedicated video game time. Nah, I felt bad because while it was a ton of fun, it felt exactly like the predecessor Breath of the Wild except on steroids. Obviously, Breath of the Wild on steroids is awesome, but when I had so many fresh experiences in my backlog, it just felt wrong. I couldn't help but think about how I could instead be playing games like Fire Emblem Engage, Pikmin 4, Red Dead Redemption 2, yeah, that game from 2018. I never played that even though I owned a sealed copy because I never had the time. And you know what? There's plenty of other games in my backlog I never find the time for either. Honestly, I've always hated this mentality that you can only play games if they were released within like the last 3 months. Like anytime I see somebody complaining about the lack of a Nintendo Direct or State of Play or whatever, I'm just like, oh come on, you haven't played every single game ever made, even if gaming's your entire life. Surely while you're bitching about the lack of new games coming out, you could play one of the older ones you missed, you know? Hell, I bought a PS5 just to play Final Fantasy 16, and the little amount of time I spent on this game has been absolutely amazing, but for reasons I can't explain, it just kinda got put on hiatus in my gaming backlog. And ever since then, my PS5 has pretty much just been my Crunchyroll player. I don't really care that I spent the money on a console that I barely touched, I just wish I had the time to actually play the one game I genuinely wanted it for in the first place. Whenever Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo announce new games, most people are always upset that they didn't announce enough, which I totally understand given that the PS5 is not a new console at the time of this recording, and there's only one game that I really want to play on it as it is. Which isn't really that impressive for a console that's been around for a few years. But even though it kind of makes me feel like a little bit of a king to see new awesome games competing with each other for my time, there's also this sadistic part of me that kind of enjoys the lack of new games a little bit, just because it kind of gives me time to catch up on everything that I missed. And as if all these new games weren't too much already, we have services like Game Pass that have tons of classic and modern games that I've never played, and for a pretty goddamn good deal at the risk of sounding like an Xbox commercial. But again, I don't have the time to play any of these games. Thanks to this lack of time for me to play new games, it's incredibly easy for me to be the only person left alive still committing to boycotting new Pokemon games till the National Dex comes out. Look, I know damn well I'm not making any difference whatsoever given the record sales to all the recent Pokemon games, but even though I do still like this franchise in general, it's really easy to skip a game if I'm given any reason to whatsoever. Like, I'm sure they're still fun, even with all the bugs and the lack of a National Dex, but I haven't even so much as looked at Persona 5 Tactica, so why not use the opportunity to stick it to Game Freak in the least effective way possible and play something else instead? I know people hate how games are $70 now, and I'm not gonna act like I'm happy with it, but a $10 price increase after 20 years of paying $60 isn't really that big of a deal to me at all, especially considering how much the prices for pretty much everything got jacked up in recent years. Never mind the insane prices our parents had to pay for games like Wayne's World and Shaq Fu back in the 90s. I know 70 is a lot of money for some people, but even so, I still think the far bigger issue is finding the time to play all these games. Maybe this is just me, but I'm far less concerned with how much money I'm gonna have to spend on a game and way more concerned with how much of my time it'll cost to get the full experience. Like, it's weird too, because a lot of my all-time favorite games are long as hell, but the idea of playing a massive open-world sandbox game is so daunting to me, because while that game might be the best of the bunch, I'd usually prefer like 3 or 4 smaller scale games I could finish in like 10 to 20 hours and move on, even at $70 a pop. Because I mean, games aren't really $70 if you go about it the right way. If you make sure to pre-order, you usually get some kind of random little trinket you can sell on eBay for like $20 to $30 sometimes. And then if it's a game you don't even plan on revisiting in the next few years, you could also sell that for like another $50 or $60, and sometimes even make a little bit of money after everything's all said and done. Sure, this might not be good for developers, but honestly, why feel bad for them? Well, look, okay, you can feel bad for them if you want, but at the same time, you also forfeit your right to get pissed at the $70 cost. Now, I don't know about you, but personally, I'm gonna look out for myself over these AAA developers. Speaking of selling games, though, since you never actually have the time to play all those games that have been sitting on your shelf, it's really hard to resist the urge to sell some of them off, especially when you need money and realize how much more expensive they are now than when you originally bought them. Like, it really does suck to part ways with some of these titles, but with things like the aforementioned Game Pass, or hell, even the much less impressive Nintendo Switch Online, you can play a ton of the best games ever made on modern TVs with way better options for saving your progress. And to be honest, this is kind of just way more convenient than actually playing all these games on their original consoles on a tube TV. And all this is without even mentioning emulation, which is, you know, free. There's all kinds of amazing emulator handhelds that you can also hook up to your TV to play these days, with the ability to play just about any classic game flawlessly. And you can even play fan-translated games that were never released outside of Japan that, for whatever reason, the original publishers aren't even localizing themselves. I mean, everybody's getting genuinely frustrated with Nintendo for not releasing Mother 3, and while I totally think that they should, I can't fathom why anybody could possibly care. After all, if you wait for Nintendo's official translation, which I do think is inevitable, it's guaranteed to be just as watered down as Earthbound was, possibly even more so given how sensitive the world pretends to be these days. But again, price isn't really the issue here, it's time, and you can give me every game ever made for free, and I'm still only going to find the time to play a handful of them. And I know this might just be me, but this is why I never really cared for playing games online all that much. I mean, even if I put thousands of hours into getting good at one online game, it's only a matter of time before another one comes along and makes me start all over from scratch. I mean, I'm still honest to God trying to finish Paper Mario and the Origami King, which came out like 74 years ago, in addition to everything else in my rotation. I know it sounds like I'm frigged with ADHD over my inability to actually finish games, but I swear this one's not on my learning disability at all. Nah, it's the lack of opportunity, because again, most of us don't just play games and nothing else in our free time. A lot of us have other interests in life, and not to mention the fact that you can watch pretty much anything that was ever made without even resorting to pirating, and to be honest, sometimes after a long day, I just don't feel like having to react to anything on the screen, and kinda just want to stare at the new Steven Seagal movie or watch a Crazy Lokes video or something. This might be unfortunate for my backlog, sure, but fortunate in just about every other regard, because the best part about the modern days is that you really have no excuse to be bored. Unless, of course, you're at work or in line, or, you know, you're a boring person. One of the bigger advantages of being in your 30s is that you probably don't take all this mindless amusement for granted. I mean, after all, we're the same people that had to watch Billy Madison like twice a week because we didn't have memes. I know a lot of this video might sound like I'm complaining, but I really don't consider having too much fun stuff to keep up with as a problem in any way. So in that sense, gaming in your 30s is actually better than ever. So what if you can't play all the games that are coming out? It's not like you played everything as a kid anyway, unless you were rich. We all missed tons of games before, and most of us miss games now, but the key is that there's always something to play and no excuse to be bored, even if you're broke. You can watch Terminator and Beverly Hills Cop on YouTube for free, come on! I love being spoiled with more good stuff than ever before, and by that I mean all the ways to play older games as well as all the newer ones. But the trade-off for all this awesomeness is that you just don't have the time to enjoy everything anymore. And even when you do, it's even more rare to get the chance to fully immerse yourself into something and just forget about everything else going on in the world with your phone right by your side that could just take you out of the experience entirely and also tempt you with looking up hints if you get stuck. So yeah, sometimes it might seem like gaming used to be better as a kid, given how much more you can immerse yourself with fewer responsibilities and much more time on your hands. But with more choices than ever, more possibility to what games can be, and nobody to stop you from playing anything you want, I actually think that gaming as a full-grown man's better than ever, even if it doesn't always seem that way, given how different it may feel.
Anyway, that's all for today, but if you got a kick out of my nonsense, then you might like this video I made about why everyone's selling their video game collections off. But you'll excuse me though, I gotta go water my snake. Later!